Welcome to everybody. This is a most unusual class. I don't know if you are aware of the fact that we had a seminar a week or two ago, but today's message is somewhat different than it was at the previous seminar, although the basic idea is the same. Today's message is specially prepared in the invisible for those who are here. And its purpose is to go into the absolute, to look at things that we may not have noticed before, and to find certain solutions that haven't necessarily escaped us, but that we hadn't reached this far, to ferret out something new. And I hope today's class will confirm that to you. I'd like to begin it with a meditation, though, because I feel that until we have touched the Spirit, we have not properly begun this class. We could be still and let the Spirit divine our purpose, but I'd like to enumerate it. That we are here as spirit, seeking spiritual consciousness and hoping that the Father lights within us a receptivity to His words. It suddenly occurs to us in the material sense of life that there are not many places left to go. What we have done, we have done numerous times. We have repeated our errors. We have sought solutions to old problems. Seemingly it's all been done. And yet, the race riots occur. I don't know how many times you've seen them, or how devastating they have been. The presidential elections come. All of the things that happen in slow rotation in our human world come back to us. And if we haven't broken out of that mold, it's about time that we do. We find that to change the world is not our program. That's for people who want to change it. We find that changing the world is not something that we do well even, but rather by looking at the spiritual side of things, seeing what reality is made of, and finding our own true identity. We come to a different way of life, a way of life that, like light, can move into places that human beings cannot move into. And so we pursue that method of living. Ours is the spiritual life. And we are always interested in finding another degree of insight that will take us further along the path that leads to the kingdom of God. Because that is our destination. To begin our quest, we have adopted a unique form of self-identification. The common names, Joe, Mary, Charlie, those have gone by the wayside. The name that we have all adopted and must consider as the only name we shall adopt is I. I is the same as God. I is the same as Jesus Christ. And I is the same wherever you go. But we have not learned what we must learn about I. We've got to seek out the depths of the Word and how faith in the power of I will take us out of the material world into degrees of awakening in the spiritual world. And we find that the fourth world, which is the world of mind and matter, is not our concern. Somehow, when you're a touch into the fifth world, the fourth world begins to shape up for you. All the things that have displeased us in it, they seem to be just a little further away from us. They don't touch your consciousness as much. And in the fifth, as you begin to look into the journey a little in a higher realm, you find that the fifth takes care of the fourth. And if you think back a little, you'll see that somehow things that have happened to you have come in such a way that you could be aware of the invisible miracle that lights your life. Some of you know what I'm talking about. Some may not particularly have thought of it in that light, but if you examine your life, you find you have nothing that you cannot do. That everything that Spirit tells you to do, you can do. And that somehow the difficulties in doing it melt along the way. You find that the Spirit which goes before you has prepared a mansion or two, and somehow what human intelligence can't do, what human intelligence can't decipher or penetrate, the Spirit of you penetrates, and you find you're in a choice seat in another realm, and everything you touch seems to be lit up as if it were meant for you to identify it. You're moving in a new realm, and I hope to continue this effortless means of reaching a higher realm during this seminar. We wish to find where we're going, more specifically. And we may not find the method, but we'll decide as we go along what we're going to do that's different and how we're going to do it. One thing is certain, The movements you make as a spiritual being can never be premeditated. They flow from an unseen source. They all carry with them the unmistakable presence of the Spirit of God leading you to a place that is yours alone. I said that I is the identity. We want to investigate that identity. We want it to lead us in such a way that we enter new avenues of awareness. I am the living Spirit of God. I am going to be your leader and your leader and your leader and the leader of the universe as long as it opens itself to me. Otherwise, there will be only a leader for this one and that one. And those who have no leader will find that they are relying on the human mind. When you're relying on I, you're not relying on the human mind. And that's where the road becomes a double road. The one you leave behind and the new road that you take. I. Always I. Now the world is unaware of I. The world is unaware that the system by which the Father educates the Spirit is an invisible network, one that does not meet the eye, one that never changes, one that always goes on with its work, regardless of what happens in the world. This invisible network is what we want to be introduced to very clearly. It begins with the presence of Christ in you. The Christ in you is replacing the material mind of you. You have been aware of it perhaps, maybe not. You should have been aware of it. The Christ in you is making its presence felt by letting you know that I in the midst of you am mighty. The Christ in you is the Christ in the Italian laborer down the street. The Christ in you is the Christ in the colored member of the ghetto. The Christ in you is the Christ in the Libyan who has just come to this shore. The Christ of everyone is identical. The outer form may vary in age, in man or woman, in race, in human things, but the inner Christ, if it could be examined, you would decide, how could the world be so blind as not to know that there is only one inner Christ infinitely? And across this infinite invisible network, the Father has set up a plan whereby you can be introduced to the kingdom. And you can discover, as you go, that every move, every thought, every action is blessed by the presence of God and it has no ending. Now, in the interminable now, the Spirit of God operates. And you discover that there is more to you than the outer form. There's more to you than the inner spiritual body. The infinity of your being is the infinity of my being, and the infinity of his and her being. And that infinity stretches out, 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 and beyond, and it is the being of us all. When you get to know it, to be aware of its infinity, and that it is you, you realize that the Christ of you extends beyond the form. And then things come to your awareness. At times they make your breath leave your body. You just can't believe what's happening. And every step of the way you say to yourself, well, who could have taught me this? Nobody but the Spirit itself. Because that's who you are. And as you resign yourself from the human race and say to yourself, that was a nice game while I played it, but I'm playing it no more. I'm not standing around in a human body because that's what they bury. I'm not standing around in a human body because that's what has disastrous results. That's what is divided. One day it's healthy and one day it's not. One day it's rich, one day it's poor. Where does it go? We've discovered there's no end to the human race. It just goes off and it disappears. And then we wait for it to return again. And it reincarnates and starts another series of errors and a series of good points. And we've learned that that is not life. That's the dream life, the imitation of life. And it takes a long time before we become aware that we've been dreaming. Literally, we have been dreaming. We have lived an imaginary life. And as we begin to touch a seed of truth here and there, we find out that we have a completely other life, a divine life, an immortal life. And it's not a thing of the future. It's something that's right here. We can't even understand how we could have been so asleep for centuries. And in this lifespan, so asleep that we never divined it was a present fact. Here one and there one. And suddenly, I am the chosen one. And my neighbor, who didn't know he was the chosen one too, he is the chosen one. And one here and one there, until we become aware that God's plan does not include 1, 2, 3. It includes every one, because every one is the invisible Christ child, perhaps unknown to himself, always awaiting that day when the awakening comes and the child looks out and says, I see a new universe. The world I lived in of matter is a make-believe world. And then the plan becomes almost visible. Now we live in the fourth world. That's where we are. We live in the world of mind and matter. We've always thought of that as pretty close to the end of things. It isn't even the beginning of things. The fourth world is what Darwin stumbled across when he discovered the way animals became humans, tiny little animals became something else, vegetation came on the earth, water. It all started out in the first world. And the first world was a zero, a complete nothing. We had lost our consciousness. If you remember, Jesus said, whoever starts in heaven ends in heaven. And if we could translate that, it would be a statement that we all started in heaven. We're really divine being. We start in heaven, and for the sake of argument, we have called it the seventh world. You go down the sixth, the fifth, the fourth, third. You come in the descent from heaven, you pass into 7 worlds. And when you're down to that 0 point, you're just a blob of consciousness. Nothing. You look out, you don't even know who you are or what you are. You're not a human being. You're not even a mineral. Just nothing. And it's pretty tough to start at that level, but we all started at that level on our return to the Father's house. We came from heaven, 7th level, down to the 1st. And then we proceeded upward. We became a stone, something inanimate, seemingly. And finally water spread upon the earth. And from the water came the vegetation. The vegetation then fed the animals, the fish in the sea. We're the 2nd level. And the 3rd level is a little higher. Then comes the ape. And from the ape, as ridiculous as it sounds, that's where man came from. And Darwin was right. Only he stopped. When man came, we were at the 4th level of consciousness. A brain had developed. The body had taken a certain form. We call it civilized. But unbeknown to you and I, the body was not a creation of God. The body was created by the world mind. And the world mind still runs this body. God doesn't. You can cut your finger and ask God to heal it up. God doesn't hear a word you say. The world mind is the king of this universe. And it was at this point, 2,000 years ago, that Jesus appeared to take man out of the 4th world, out of the world mind, into the world of spirit, which is the 5th world. And that's why it's all pretty much unknown to us, and why it's all been criticized, overlooked, censored, misrepresented, and all of the negatives that have to do with discovering that all that has been happening is that man, in his quest for reality, is now ready to move into the 5th world. Out of the world of mind and matter into the world of spirit. Now, the world mind is not going to say, well, so long, friend, have a good time. The world mind is going to continue running the universe that it's created. And the best way to get out of the world mind is to find the inner Christ. You cannot succeed in defeating the world mind through anything you're going to do with your mind, because your mind is a product of the world mind. The world mind creates the human mind, and that's why the human mind is hypnotized. It's twice removed from reality. It looks out at a world. It says the world created by God is the one I'm looking at, but it isn't. It's looking at the world created by the world mind. God isn't in the world mind. God isn't in this world. The kingdom of God isn't in this world. And Jesus said so. My kingdom is not of this world. We simply have allowed ourselves to flow with whatever happens in the visible world, and we've rated ourselves as intelligent or unintelligent depending on which we were, but neither one is aware of the reality. The best thinker in the world is stuck. Each is a prisoner in the world mind. And it's said that the lowest in my kingdom will be higher than the highest in the world for that reason. Once something in you resonates to this approach, to the fact that in the world you're about to be plowed under and begin again, that's all you can do. And of course, when we stop and realize that is a fact, we say, how can I move out of this world? What has the Father planned? And if you say that, at least you're on the track of discovering what the Father has planned, because there's no other plan that'll get you out of this world except the Father's plan. Now let's look at it. Christ in man, the inner Christ, across the world, is one Christ in every man, regardless of age or nationality or country or color. There is a Christ in every man, and that Christ in every man is called the light of God. Maybe you have been aware of your inner light. The chances are some of us have. The Father within is the same as Christ. Now we have to take this man Jesus and say, what has he contributed to the intelligence of man? And we say he contributed everything that must be contributed. There are few authorities we can accept. He certainly is, in our part of the world, the outstanding one. He says, I am the way. Well, what way was he speaking of? It took us 2,000 years to understand what he meant. That I am the way out of this world. But he didn't mean Jesus. No, he meant I. And that is your name. I. Each of us clinging to the reality of our being that I am I is the way. I and the Father are one. I becomes the incredible divine password. And then you discover that it's more than a word. The power of I is beyond belief. I in the midst of you am mighty. The power of I can move the mountains. The power of I can divert the flood. The power of I can do all the things that must be done to lift you from the fourth world to the fifth, from the world of matter to the world of spirit. I am the light. And then we're told, let your light shine, which means find the Christ within you, for the Christ is your light. Let your Christ shine. Let your divine identity shine. And you become worried right away, because you say, well, if I'm Christ and he's Christ, there's nothing special about me. No, we lose our individuality. We lose our individuality, but we gain our infinity. Instead of being a limited person who moves through 70 and 80 years and then ends, we become what we have always been. Infinite being, living in eternity. And although we're not there now in our realization, the spirit of our being is there. And when we catch up to who we are, we shall find that we are in the seventh world. So that's going to be our pilgrimage. It's definitely slow, but it's specific. And it takes us out of the negativity that ends in what is called death. Somehow a faith develops in us that that's a journey I'm going to enjoy. I look forward to that journey. I have capacities I didn't dream of. The Father has planned that journey for every being who walks the earth, and that journey will be made by the Father. I and the Father are one. You'll find that one is the same one. I am the Father, and the Father is me. Each of us will learn that we are equal with God, as Paul decided. It's quite a spectacular point of view, but he decided we are all equal with God, because he could find the reality of his being was that Christ. That Christ which was born in him in a most spectacular way. The man who killed the Christians became one of the foremost Christians when he discovered that he had no physical body. Suddenly there he was without a physical body. That's explained by his eyes going blind. What did he discover when he discovered no physical body? How was he still alive? Here I am with no physical body, but I'm living. I must be in some other kind of body. Maybe he didn't discover at that instant, but he discovered that there was a thing called the Christ body, or the spiritual body. The same body which was the body of Jesus Christ. The same body which was the body that couldn't be crucified. So then we have beginnings of a plan we see how God, in spite of every bit of ignorance in the world, of man's unfamiliarity with the divine light of his own being, brought a messenger into the earth whom men looked at and did not know what they were looking at. They looked at Jesus and they thought he was another man. They still think he was another man. But as students of spirit, we learn that Jesus always was an immortal. He was an immortal who appeared among mortals, and they couldn't tell the difference. He looks just like me, only he has the ability to disappear into the invisible. He has the ability to walk on a wave. He has the ability to sit on a mountaintop and then stop a storm in the ocean. How could he do that? His immortality was the answer. Before Abraham, I was. And there we have Jesus telling us that his name is I. And we've just learned that our name is I. Then we have Jesus telling us, the things I do, ye shall do, and greater work shall ye do. Why? Because I is your name and I is my name. We are one infinite Christ. The only way I am different from you is that I have realized my Christhood, and you are just beginning. But you are the same Christ I am. This was his message. The world didn't know. So let's take a very calm look at the truth that is right on the threshold of our mind. We are embarking on an experience called real identity. The Christ that I shall discover, the Christ that someone in another part of the world shall discover, and the Christ that maybe a child shall discover, all are the one infinite Christ. No matter what his name or her name or my name, we are one in Christ. And the world is being Christed to be brought into the fifth world. That is what your journey involves at this time. You are being lifted above your concept of matter. While you maintain this form, you are being lifted above it so that in the Spirit you will find that you are not subject to the same physical limitations as one who is not aware of the Spirit. You may find that heart attacks and rheumatism and all those things may attack friends around you, but for some reason they will not reach you in the same way. You can't explain it, you don't know why, but as you reflect a moment, you will see that the beginning of your spiritual awareness takes you out of material law. Material law divides man into two, both good and bad. When there is no material law, there is no two. The matter doesn't become defective or unable to be used or deteriorated. You suddenly lose the capacity to live in that type of environment. In spirit, the light of you, which is going to be the all of you one day, the light of you does not divide into good and bad. The light of you is actually the light of God. And as you move into the spiritual realm, into the light of God, you're under the protection of the Father. In the material world, you might walk across the street and get hit by an automobile. But the light of you, it will be seen as the physical self of you, but somehow it doesn't get hit by the car. You'll find that the light of you does not get into the same jams that the physical self of you does. The fears, the doubts, the uncertainties, all those that we have all become accustomed to, somehow are avoided not by intelligence, not by choice. They don't exist in the spiritual world. There are no levels of good and bad in the spiritual world. And as you move into that type of awareness, all the things that trouble a human being are obsolete. They simply are not in your world. Now, this jump is not sudden. It's not overnight. But I think anyone in the spirit is aware that this is what happens. You can more or less look at your own life and see instances where things that normally happen to physical beings somehow didn't happen that way in your life. And I think we can depend on this. We can depend on it to such an extent that we are about to seek more of the spirit and less of the material world. Because there's nothing we can do in the material world that will take us beyond 30, 40, or 50 more years. Then it's over. But in the spiritual world, we move out into eternity, knowledgeably. So that's where we're going. We are, unawares to ourselves, eternal life. That's who we were at the beginning. That's who we are now. Eternal life does not have a physical body, does not have physical experiences. You will not be sick one day and well the other, well next. But when you realize the spiritual nature of your life, it becomes clear that that is what Jesus was here to do. He was here to take us out of matter into spirit. He told us we had to be born again. And many are still suffering from the fact that they only heard it but didn't understand what it meant. Then they weren't born again. Some excuses were made. Some people said I've been born again, but they didn't know what he meant. Whoever has not been born again is subject to the laws of matter. And you know, being born again is not an easy task. The light shined in the darkness. In other words, the world is unaware that Christ is in all men. And he goes on to say, the light shineth in the darkness, and the darkness comprehendeth it not. Now, in those two lines, you find the infinite Christ, which is in every man, and you find 99.9% of the human race unaware of the Christ, which is in all men. And that basically is the human problem. Now then, you have something wrong with you. And you say, why? Why have I got this and he got that and she has this? Well, it's very simple. And yet it's avoided the knowledge of mankind. You are the Son of God. And you're not living that way. And so you get a problem. And that tells you about the fact that it's God's will that you be the Son of God. And so when we say that God's will is what you follow, it's necessary to spend some time seeking out that will. It's necessary to correct all errors in which you overlook the presence of the Christ within yourself. And just as quickly as you can, I mean before you leave this room, there should be the knowledge in every one that within me is the Christ. Within me is the light of God. Within me is the infinite light of God. The infinite Christ within me. And then that is my name. I am the infinite Christ of God, because there's no finite Christ. I cannot be Christ finite. There is none. The Christ of God is whom we all are. And that makes you a very unique being. You may be sitting in this room, but your infinite Christhood is not sitting in this room. Your infinite Christhood is everywhere throughout the globe. And unless you get used to that idea, it won't be of much use to you. I want to change your view of yourself. I want you to see that you cannot be anything but an infinite being. That's the reason we have lifespans, because we have finitized ourselves. We cannot finitize ourselves because we're being untrue. You am the Christ. The Christ is infinite. I am infinite. That means you will find me anywhere in the globe. And I'm as much there as I am here. And that makes you a very unusual being. And that's what you are, an unusual being. And you're going to build on that knowledge. You'll see that because you are the infinite Christ, you can't have a local problem. You've had local problems because you did not respect the infinity of your being. You've been content with being a finite person. And there is none. We should now be aware of the unusual nature of being. Each of us is the infinite Christ wearing a temporary garment of flesh. But the consciousness that knows that I am not flesh, I am the living Christ, finds that harmonies begin to establish themselves unknown to human beings. Something that has to be done gets done, and you weren't even aware that it had to be done. Things you didn't know were possible start happening in your life. The moment you acknowledge your infinite self, your life has changed. And it won't be long before you realize that the change is dramatic and affecting everything that you do. Your whole perspective, your capacity, your tolerance, your absence of fear. When you are the infinite Christ, in your consciousness, not just in your mouth, think for a moment what that might mean. What can you fear? The fear would be the denial of who you are. What can you lack? Every negative is the denial that I am the infinite Christ. The problem of lack and fear and discord all stem from the false identification which we take on ourselves as we call ourselves human beings. It's almost obsolete to be a human being for a student of truth. And the sooner we reach the point where we can spot this discrepancy, when we hear ourselves described as a human being, we feel awkward. We don't even know who they're talking about at first. Because I was once under that impression. But as you come above that and faithfully uphold that, you find that you've been reborn. And as you uphold that so much, that never in your lifetime are you caught unawares that you begin to suspect that you're still a human being, then you find that the phrase being born again is something that you have already done. And that is the spiritual rebirth, where nothing can come nigh thy dwelling, because your dwelling is not a physical dwelling anymore. You don't live in a house. You live in Christ. And that's the difference between spiritual living and physical living. You translate everything into the Spirit of God. Now people will come to you in a different way. They won't know themselves why. I see people frequently who once were very material, and they looked it. And then I see them, their outlook has changed. They're so different that you don't recognize them at first. Suddenly they appear before you and you think it's a whole new person, and it's that same person you knew. But they have taken a new consciousness, and everything in their life moves in a different speed, at a different level. It seems that human relationships are brought to a new type of awareness when one partner takes on the spirit and one doesn't. Many men find they are lagging behind. Many women are somewhat ahead of their husbands. But when a man takes on the spirit and becomes an adept at it, it makes no difference if he's male or female. It makes no difference if a woman takes it on, if she is adept at it. Each has the same potential, the same capacity, the same unlimited capacity. I think we've reached the point now where we can learn how to be transparencies for spiritual truth without saying a word. We can show forth who we are and who we expect other people to be by the way we treat them. Have you noticed in your life that over the past 5 years, something in you has taken a new turn, a new depth, and people around you have changed their attitudes about who you were, what you were? Have you been released from a sort of bondage by finding this new self? Now you should have a spiritual body, which you may not be aware of, but the spiritual body is the only body that you do have. You may think I have a fleshly body, but when you learn that you can't have two, and that the fleshly body is the concept we entertain about our spiritual body, then you're a little closer to the truth, than you had been in your human days. Jesus came on earth again to teach man that he was not a mortal being, that man was immortal, and that man had not a body of flesh but a spiritual body, and the world still is not aware of this teaching. When he stood before the tomb of Lazarus and he said, "Lazarus, come forth," and the supposedly dead man walked forth, what was he saying? What was he teaching us? He was teaching us that Lazarus in his invisible body was still alive. In his visible body he was dead. But the invisible body of spirit was alive. And he was saying, you have an invisible body of spirit that is always alive. It isn't something you're going to develop later. You have it now. He came to show us that everything he had in this world, we have now. But we have it invisibly. We have to develop the knowledge that we have it, and then develop the knowledge of how to use it and how to depend on it. And there's nothing that Jesus showed that he had that is not yours now. You're not going to die to develop a spiritual body. You're going to die to the flesh, die to the belief in flesh, and your spiritual body will walk out, but you will still appear in flesh. Once you learn that this spiritual body is real, and you commune with the Christ within, to your intense surprise, you'll discover your spiritual body is beginning to awaken. It may not seem so at this moment, but you'll find someday you're way ahead of where you are now, and you'll find that things which we are saying now will seem so advanced, at that day they'll seem sort of obsolete. You will see young girls and young men aware of their spiritual bodies, knowledgeably in them permanently, because your spiritual body will never die. When the flesh is laid to rest, there will be a lingering light. The Christ light never dies. You can't have the Christ light now and lose it. There's no place you can lose the Christ light. And that's the beauty of God's world, that each of us has the Christ light that we can never lose, that even when the body lies in a sense of rest, in a sense called death, we're not dead. Lazarus come forth was just another proof of that. Because the Christ light which was alive came forth. I wish we could demonstrate that every person could see a dead person walk again. Jesus showed it many times. In Maine, the boy who was dead wasn't in his coffin yet. Sat up in it at any rate. He wasn't buried yet. He was alive. Why? Because the Christ in him was alive. And that was the demonstration that Christ in you is always alive. The Christ in the 12-year-old girl that he healed when her father came to him, the nobleman's son, the Christ in him, the Christ in Moses, who came back after 1,600 years, and he had been buried. We're going to find that most unusual thing called perpetual life. And as we become aware of it, awakened to it, it will not be a deadness. It will come out and be used. And you will find, and I am finding, that we have no capacity to die. It simply is not there. If you are the Christ life, the Christ light, Christ has no way of dying. Christ and God are one. And the Christ light of your being cultivated brings you out of the sleep of mortality into the light of immortality, which is perpetual. This is the night that you learn that you can never die. And if you doubt me and do some research, you'll find that death only comes to those who believe in death. But it doesn't come to them in the sense that it's real. They accept it and they lie down. Your infinite capacity for life will always be with you. Now the flesh must lie down, but the flesh will not lie down when the Christ has awakened. And now it is up to us to become trained in Christ awareness so that we become more alive than we have been. And life eternal becomes a heritage of every man, every woman. You'll find it become more evident as you go along. You'll see signs of it everywhere. And in yourself too. Too long we have been asleep to who we are. We have never been mortal. We are immortal now. We are immortal Christ at this moment. And I like to meditate on that, to reach a realization that is more poignant, more realized, Thou seest me, thou seest the Father. You will realize that everything Jesus said of himself is true of you. to establish the identity so strongly is so that you will not permit a denial of it. When you permit a denial of identity, you're denying, I am the Christ, and your denial will be your experience. Can you reach the conclusion within yourself that you have the right to say, I will not die, I am the Christ? Try it. Now you say, what about my body? Can you say, I will not die, and know that I someday will not be in this body, and yet I am alive? I think many will attain that knowledge. That my life is perpetual. One day I will graduate from a body of flesh. I will appear in it, but I will not be in it. I will appear in it now, but I'm not in it. I just don't know it. Later, I hope to know it. And then when you're aware that you're not in this body of flesh, you will find a certain degree of freedom, quite different than any kind of freedom given to you in this world of physical attributes. You won't be living in a three-dimensional world. You'll be higher, and you'll be walking this ground in the fourth dimension. You'll find the limitations of three dimensions you have outgrown. Why should you be limited to three dimensions if you are light instead of physical form? You must think of yourself as light. Because light is not limited to a space, to a boundary, to a finite form. And to the attributes of finite form. Now you may not first understand that what we're saying is who you really are and what you really are. You may think these are things that would be nice to be. I want to impress upon you that everything said so far is who you are now. And someday you will awaken to the realization of that. And as soon as you do, you will use more of yourself. The Christ within will teach you how. It is important that you constantly refresh yourself with truth that has the authority of Christ behind it. You may say, well, I am the light is just a phrase to me. But you must look again at John 1:3 or 1:4 and read what the Christ says about the light. And see that the light he's talking about is the light of you, and that's your authority. That's what I mean by following the will of God. He says, the light shines in the darkness, but the darkness comprehendeth it not. And you cannot afford to be the darkness any longer. You either are the darkness or you know, I am the light. And if you know I am the light, then your belief in it must express. That will take many different forms of experience. The light penetrates areas where the form does not. The light can go to Saudi Arabia in 5 seconds. You begin to see what your versatility will be. The light has qualities that physical matter can never have. The light has unexpected power. I mean the light of your being. In Transfiguration, forms of light appeared. Forms that were not seen on the earth by men, but by the souls of 3 disciples. Jesus called, "Step forth." The form that stepped forth from the tomb was a light form. In coming into the awareness of the human beings, it became a physical form. In their eyes, it was a form of light. When the jail that held Peter or Paul opened, it was light that opened it. It was light that took place in all of the healings. As Jesus healed a blind man, a leper, so on. He re-established the truth of the light of being, and it showed forth whole, and we saw it as flesh. But it was light invisible. And that's how you will find healings taking place in your life. The light of you, recognized, felt, lived in, will step forth as flesh, but it will be whole. This light shines in the darkness, everywhere. It is a secret of the Bible. The light that shines in the darkness is the light of you. And as you bring it forth through your knowledge of its presence, Christ in you, which has ever been there, is born. You have added another level to your awareness, to your being, which makes you permanent. We must each come into that Christ. And we're going to harp on it until we don't forget the need to be born of the Christ. That will be totally different than the first birth. That will be your second birth. may think there are some limitations. I assure you there are no limitations. Everything that Jesus Christ did, including having himself crucified while he was in a spiritual body, there is nothing that he did that you and I are not called upon to do. It may take a time. It won't be a simple thing, and we won't be called upon to do anything that we're not capable of doing. But our goal, our topmost goal, is to say as he did, "Thou seest me, thou seest the Father." And therefore, anything that is in God is in me. The Father says, "All that I have is thine." And you cannot be one with the Father without that being true of you. You are one with the Father through Christ, and all that the Father has is thine through Christ. And it may seem like a millennium or something that is far, far away. But you know, it was far away 2,000 years ago. We've made very little progress since then. And it's time to catch up. Let's review for a moment. I is your name. I is the name of Christ. It is our function in our attempt to maintain I Christ, to view the things that happen around us in a different way than the mind of man. It is our function not to let ourselves be lifted out of the knowledge and the faith that I, Christ, is by name. You will find many opportunities to uphold that. And you will find increasing strength as you uphold it. You will find fortitude you never knew you had. But it will not be borrowed, it will be true.
Hey everyone, thanks for tuning into our channel. If you're enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button below. It really helps us out. And why not share this video with your friends? Spread the word and help us reach more people. Lastly, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notifications so you never miss a new video from us. Thanks for watching and see you next time.